Amid the glamour of a luxurious wedding ceremony, a single act shattered the enchantment. The groom, without hesitation, slapped the bride. But what he didn't know was that this act would mark the beginning of a twist fate had carefully planned, one that would change everything in unimaginable ways. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom glittered like a crystal palace on that fateful June evening, its chandeliers casting diamond-like reflections across the faces of New York's elite. Charlotte Morrison stood before the full-length mirror in her $50,000 Vera Wang wedding dress, her fingers trembling as they traced the delicate lace sleeve. The reflection showed everything she'd dreamed of since childhood: the perfect bride, the perfect venue, the perfect life waiting to unfold. Yet her emerald eyes, usually bright with determination, held a shadow that even the most expensive makeup artist couldn't conceal. "Miss Charlotte, your mother's Cartier necklace looks absolutely stunning," her personal stylist Maria gushed, adjusting the $175,000 piece that graced her neck. "The whole Upper East Side will be talking about this wedding for years." Charlotte's penthouse suite at the Pierre Hotel, where she'd spent the morning preparing, offered a commanding view of Central Park's lush expanse. The room itself was a testament to excess. Champagne flowing from crystal flutes, exotic flowers worth thousands adorning every surface, and a team of professionals fussing over every detail of her appearance. "Harper should be here by now," Charlotte murmured, checking her Patek Philippe watch, a small engagement gift from Donald worth more than most people's annual salary. As if summoned by thought alone, Harper Matthews burst through the door, her Louboutin heels clicking against the marble floor. "I'm so sorry, Char. Traffic on 5th was insane, even with the Bentley's driver taking shortcuts." Harper's face, though apologetic, carried an underlying tension that Charlotte chose to ignore. "But I'm here now. And you look like $1,000,000. Charlotte attempted a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Try 50 million, Harper corrected, but her smile faltered as she approached her best friend. In a lower voice, she added, "Are you sure about this, Charlotte? After what happened at the rehearsal dinner?" Charlotte's hand instinctively moved to cover her wrist, where a Bulgari bracelet concealed a fading bruise. "Donald was just stressed about the merger. You know how much pressure he's under with the Thompson deal." 3 years ago, Charlotte had been a promising interior designer, transforming Manhattan's most exclusive properties with her innovative vision. Then she met Donald Pierce III at a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He was everything the Upper East Side valued: Harvard Business School graduate, heir to Pierce Industries' billions, and possessor of a smile that could charm board members and socialites alike. Their whirlwind romance had been the talk of their social circle, chronicled in page 6, and celebrated at every exclusive venue from the Rainbow Room to Per Se. What the society columns didn't capture were the subtle changes: how Charlotte's design firm was quietly closed to focus on their future together, how her vibrant friend circle shrank to those Donald approved of, how her phone was regularly checked for security purposes by Pierce Industries' IT team. "Mrs. Pierce wanted me to remind you about the prenup signing," Maria interrupted, holding out a Mont Blanc pen. "The lawyers are waiting in the adjacent suite." Harper's face darkened. "The prenup? Now? An hour before the ceremony?" "Donald's mother insisted on some last-minute adjustments," Charlotte explained, her voice carefully neutral. "Just standard provisions about company protection." The prenuptial agreement, delivered by Eleanor Pierce's personal legal team, was anything but standard. Its 100 pages of clauses and conditions read more like a prison sentence than a marriage contract. But with 300 guests already seated, including the governor, 2 senators, and the cream of Manhattan society, Charlotte felt the weight of expectations crushing any thoughts of resistance. A sharp knock preceded Eleanor Pierce's entrance. Donald's mother, immaculate in Chanel and dripping with Harry Winston diamonds, surveyed the room with the same critical eye she used in Pierce Industries' boardroom. "Charlotte, darling, you look appropriate," Eleanor managed, her lipsticked smile not reaching her ice-blue eyes. "Though I still think the Dior would have been more suitable. Now, about those papers." "Mother Pierce." Harper stepped forward, her voice steady despite Eleanor's intimidating presence. "Surely this could wait until after the ceremony." Eleanor's gaze could have frozen the Hudson River. "Ms. Matthews, while we appreciate your friendship with Charlotte, family matters are precisely that. Family matters." The next hour passed in a blur of signatures, touch-ups and carefully orchestrated photographs. Charlotte felt increasingly disconnected, as if watching herself from a great distance. The girl in the mirror nodded at the right moments, smiled on cue, and played her part perfectly. Then came the moment that would change everything. The plaza's ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland, despite the summer heat outside. Thousands of white orchids and crystals created an ethereal canopy above the guests. As Wagner's wedding march began to play on the string quartet's priceless instruments, Charlotte stood at the entrance, her father beside her. "Ready, Princess?" James Morrison asked, concern flickering across his distinguished features. "You know you can still—" "Daddy, please," Charlotte whispered, her grip tightening on her bouquet of rare blue roses. "Everything is perfect. Everything has to be perfect." But perfection, like the crystal glasses lining the reception tables, was about to shatter. As Charlotte began her walk down the aisle, she caught sight of Donald at the altar. His handsome face, featured so often in Forbes and Fortune, showed none of the rage she'd witnessed the night before. Yet something in his stance, the way his fingers clenched and unclenched, sent a chill down her spine. The ceremony proceeded like a perfectly choreographed dance, each word and gesture rehearsed to perfection. The 7-tier wedding cake, the vintage champagne, the surprised gasps as doves were released into the evening sky. Everything followed the script Eleanor had meticulously planned, until it didn't. During the reception, Charlotte was speaking with the French ambassador when she felt Donald's hand clamp around her arm. His whisper, meant for her ears alone, carried the familiar edge that usually preceded his darkest moods. "I saw you talking to Richard earlier." "The help, Charlotte? Really?" Richard, the handsome young sommelier who had merely recommended a wine pairing, had shown Charlotte more genuine kindness in that brief interaction than Donald had in months. Perhaps that's why she did something she'd never dared before. She pulled her arm away. The sound of the slap echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot, silencing the orchestra and freezing the dancers mid-step. Charlotte's cheek burned, but it was the public humiliation, the collective gasp of 300 of New York's most influential people, that truly stung. In that crystalline moment of silence, as champagne bubbles rose in abandoned glasses and the orchestra's sheet music fluttered to the floor, Charlotte saw her reflection fractured across every shocked face in the crowd. And in each fragment, she finally recognized the truth she'd been avoiding. This wasn't the beginning of her fairy tale. It was the end of her silence. The aftermath of the wedding reception unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of damage control. Eleanor Pierce's network of connections sprang into action with practiced precision. By morning, Page 6 had transformed the incident into a charming anecdote about passionate newlyweds, while social media posts mysteriously disappeared from guests' accounts. The Pierce family's PR machine worked overtime, spinning tales of champagne-induced misunderstandings and romantic intensity. Charlotte found herself ensconced in Donald's penthouse at 432 Park Avenue, Manhattan's tallest residential tower. The $95 million apartment, a wedding gift from Pierce Industries Board, offered spectacular views of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. But to Charlotte, they felt more like the bars of an exquisitely appointed cage. "The Ashcrofts have invited us for dinner at Le Bernardin," Donald announced one evening, adjusting his Brioni suit in the mirror. "Eleanor says it's crucial for the Thompson merger." Charlotte looked up from her untouched beluga caviar, her reflection fragmenting across the crystalline dining table. "I'm not feeling well, perhaps." "That wasn't a request, darling." Donald's tone remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened. "Wear the new Oscar de la Renta. Eleanor had it specially curated for you." The dress in question hung like a beautiful threat in their walk-in closet. Every item in Charlotte's wardrobe now bore Eleanor's stamp of approval, each piece selected to project the image of Pierce Industries' perfect daughter-in-law. Even Charlotte's personal shopper at Bergdorf's had been replaced by Eleanor's trusted stylist. Life settled into a gilded routine. Mornings began with Eleanor's assistant delivering a schedule of approved social engagements. Lunches were carefully choreographed appearances at Manhattan's finest establishments, where Charlotte played her role under the watchful eyes of Eleanor's social circle. Evenings belonged to Donald's business functions, where Charlotte stood by his side, the perfect corporate wife, her smile as practiced as her silence. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Donald's control grew more suffocating with each passing day. Her phone calls were monitored, her credit card statements scrutinized, her every movement tracked by the building's security team. Even her former interior design colleagues stopped responding to her messages, quietly informed that Pierce Industries might reconsider their contracts. "It's for your own protection," Donald would say, his hands gentle even as his words cut like knives. "You know how dangerous the city can be for someone in your position. Remember what happened to the Vanderbilt heiress last summer? The threats were always veiled, wrapped in concern and sealed with designer gifts. After each episode of controlling behavior, a new piece of jewelry would appear. A Van Cleef and Arpels necklace, a rare Patek Philippe watch, a Cartier bracelet. Each gift felt like another link in an increasingly heavy chain. Eleanor's influence proved even more insidious. She orchestrated weekly family dinners at Daniel, where she would dissect Charlotte's every perceived flaw over perfectly plated French cuisine. "Darling, you simply must work on your table presence," Eleanor would say, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "The way you held your fork at the Morgan Stanley dinner, well, let's just say people noticed, and that simply won't do for a Pierce woman." The only respite came from Harper, who refused to be intimidated by the Pierce family's power plays. Despite Eleanor's attempts to freeze her out of their social circle, Harper maintained her weekly lunch dates with Charlotte at their favorite cafe in the West Village. "You don't have to live like this, Char," Harper urged during one such meeting, her voice low enough to evade the ever-present security detail. "My cousin's a partner at Kellerman and Ross. One call and we could have you out of there with enough evidence to—" "It's not that simple," Charlotte interrupted, her hands shaking as she reached for her Hermes bag. "Donald's lawyers have everything locked down. The prenup, the NDAs, the corporate entanglements, and I'd lose everything." "You're already losing everything that matters," Harper countered, sliding a business card across the table. "Just keep this, please." But it wasn't Harper's lawyer who would ultimately shift the balance. It was Richard, the sommelier from the wedding, whose path unexpectedly crossed Charlotte's again at a charity wine tasting at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. "Mrs. Pierce," he greeted her formally, but his eyes held the same genuine warmth she remembered. "The 1982 Lafitte Rothschild might interest you. It's known for its complexity and hidden depths." Through seemingly chance encounters at various elite social functions, Richard became a subtle but persistent reminder of a world beyond the Pierce family's influence. His knowledge of wine opened doors to conversations that even Eleanor's surveillance couldn't fully monitor. Each interaction, though brief, felt like coming up for air after being underwater. "The Chateau Margaux you recommended was extraordinary," Charlotte told him at another event, aware of Donald's eyes on her from across the room. "I never knew wine could tell such stories." "Every vintage has its own journey," Richard replied carefully, his meaning clear in his steady gaze. "Some need time to break free from their constraints before reaching their true potential." But their growing connection didn't go unnoticed. Eleanor's network of social spies reported every interaction, leading to increasingly volatile confrontations with Donald. "Do you think I'm blind?" Donald snarled one night, hurling a baccarat crystal glass against the wall. "Do you think I don't see how you look at him? How you embarrass me in front of everyone who matters?" The next day, Richard was fired from his position at the wine merchant that supplied all of Upper East Side's elite establishments. His reputation was systematically dismantled through whispered rumors and strategic calls. Yet somehow, he managed to secure a position at a small but prestigious wine bar in Brooklyn, just beyond the reach of Pierce Industries' influence. Charlotte's world continued to shrink. Donald installed new security features in their apartment, cameras in every room, monitoring software on all her devices, a dedicated team of security personnel who reported her every move. Her weekly lunches with Harper were reduced to supervised visits in public places, always under the watchful eyes of Donald's men. Eleanor's psychological warfare reached new heights. She began hosting intimate mentoring sessions with other elite wives, using Charlotte as an example of both privilege and subtle inadequacy. "My dear," she would say, her voice carrying across the private dining room at La Grenouille, "we simply must work on your public speaking. The way you hesitated during your speech at the Children's Hospital benefit, well, we can't have people questioning Pierce Industries' commitment to philanthropy, can we?" Each criticism was delivered with impeccable timing and maximum impact, designed to strip away what remained of Charlotte's confidence. Yet something unexpected was happening beneath the surface. Each attempt to control her, each manipulation, each public humiliation, was slowly crystallizing into something harder, more resilient. Harper noticed the change first. During a carefully monitored lunch at Le Coucou, she saw something different in Charlotte's eyes, a calculating edge that hadn't been there before. "You're planning something?" Harper whispered, pretending to adjust her Hermes scarf to avoid the security team's lip-reading capabilities. Charlotte's smile remained perfect, practiced, empty. "I'm learning, Harper. Everything they're teaching me, every rule, every expectation, I'm learning it all." The transformation was subtle but profound. Charlotte began playing Eleanor's game with unexpected precision. She hosted flawless dinner parties, made strategic appearances at key social functions, and maintained an impeccable public image. She became what they wanted, the perfect Pierce wife, so perfect it was almost suspicious. Even Richard, during their increasingly rare encounters, sensed the change. At a wine auction at Christie's, their eyes met briefly across the room. "The Chateau Latour you're bidding on," he said, when social convention allowed them to interact. "It's known for its patience. Years of pressure create something unexpected." Donald and Eleanor celebrated what they saw as Charlotte's final surrender to their world. The leash loosened slightly. Supervised lunches with Harper became slightly less supervised, social appearances slightly less scripted. Yet they failed to notice how Charlotte catalogued every weakness, every secret, every pressure point in their carefully constructed empire. The breaking point came during the annual Pierce Industries charity gala at the Mandarin Oriental. Charlotte, resplendent in a custom Valentino gown, played her role to perfection. She charmed board members, dazzled investors, and maintained the precise balance of grace and submission that Eleanor had demanded. But as she stood beside Donald during his keynote speech, watching him bask in the adoration of New York's elite, Charlotte felt something shift inside her. The weight of all the diamonds he'd given her, the designer dresses selected to keep her contained, the social connections meant to bind her, it all crystallized into something sharp and dangerous. Later that night, as she stood in their penthouse bathroom staring at her reflection in the gold-rimmed mirror, Charlotte made a decision. The woman looking back at her wasn't just surviving anymore, she was preparing for war. She picked up her phone and sent a single text to Harper. "I'm ready." The pieces were set, the players in position, and the true game was about to begin. Charlotte had learned her lessons well, perhaps too well for those who had taught them. As she slipped into bed beside Donald, her mind was already racing with possibilities, each one more devastating than the last. The next morning, she would wake up and play her role perfectly, as she had been trained to do. But now, every smile concealed a plan, every gracious nod masked a calculation, and every perfectly arranged detail was another step towards something none of them saw coming. In the glittering world of Manhattan's elite, where appearances were everything and power was the only currency that mattered, Charlotte was about to prove that the most dangerous player was the one who had nothing left to lose, except the golden chains that bound her. The truth about Donald Pierce III began unraveling on a crisp autumn morning at the Four Seasons restaurant, where Manhattan's power brokers had gathered for the annual Financial Excellence Awards. Charlotte sat at the primary table, watching her husband accept another accolade for his visionary leadership of Pierce Industries, when her phone vibrated with an encrypted message from an unknown number. "Your husband's first wife didn't die in a sailing accident. Check the Cayman Islands trust accounts from 2019. A friend." Charlotte maintained her composed smile, but her mind raced. Donald had never mentioned being married before, and Eleanor's meticulously curated family history made no reference to a previous marriage. Yet something about the message rang true, echoing doubts she'd long suppressed. That evening, during a charity auction at Sotheby's, Richard managed to slip her a thumb drive while discussing a rare vintage of Domaine de la Romane Conti. "Sometimes the truth lies in the sediment," he murmured, before disappearing into the crowd of billionaire collectors. Working late in her private study, ostensibly reviewing plans for the upcoming Pierce Foundation Gala, Charlotte accessed the drive using a secure laptop Harper had provided. What she found shattered her already fragile world. Offshore account statements, private investigator reports, and medical records that told a story far darker than she'd imagined. Victoria Ashworth Pierce, Donald's first wife, had indeed existed. A brilliant financial analyst from old money, she had started asking questions about Pierce Industries' accounting practices in early 2019. 3 months later, her yacht was found abandoned off the coast of St. Barthélemy. The official report ruled it an accident, but the private investigators' files suggested a carefully orchestrated cover-up. The same team that handled Victoria's accident is watching you now, Harper revealed during a spa day at the Mandarin Oriental, their conversation masked by the sound of flowing water. My contact at the FBI confirmed it. They're called the cleanup crew, elite fixers for the ultra-wealthy. Charlotte felt the walls closing in, but she also sensed an opportunity. "We need proof," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ambient music. Something concrete enough to break through their wall of lawyers. The next few weeks became a dangerous dance of appearances and investigation. Charlotte maintained her role as the perfect corporate wife while building a network of unlikely allies. A junior accountant at Pierce Industries, overlooked due to his modest background, provided access to internal audits. A disgraced former board member, nursing a grudge against Eleanor, offered insights into the company's darker dealings. But it was Richard who proved most valuable. His position in the wine world gave him access to private conversations among Manhattan's elite, where tongues loosened by expensive vintages revealed secrets meant to stay buried. "Donald's not just covering up financial fraud," Richard informed her during a wine tasting at the St. Regis. "The Thompson merger you mentioned, it's a front for something bigger. They're using it to hide massive losses from failed ventures in emerging markets." Charlotte's investigation led her to Rebecca Chen, a former Pierce Industries executive who'd been quietly forced out years ago. Meeting in a private suite at the Peninsula Hotel, Rebecca shared a story that connected several disturbing dots. "Eleanor's more than just a controlling mother-in-law," Rebecca explained, nervously twisting her Bulgari bracelet. "She's the architect of Pierce Industries' shadow operations. Donald's just the face. She's the one who orchestrated Victoria's removal when she got too close to the truth." This revelation forced Charlotte to re-evaluate everything she thought she knew. The endless social events, the constant surveillance, Eleanor's obsession with controlling her image. It wasn't just about maintaining social status. They were keeping her busy, distracted, unable to see the larger picture. But Charlotte wasn't the only one making discoveries. Donald's paranoia grew as whispers of investigation reached him through his own network. His behavior became increasingly erratic, his public mask of charm slipping to reveal the darkness beneath. During a private dinner at Per Se, he grabbed Charlotte's wrist with bruising force. "If you think Victoria was clever, you should know she wasn't the first person who tried to expose us. This family has survived for generations by dealing with threats, permanently." The threat was clear, but it came with an unexpected revelation. Charlotte realized that Donald's marriage to Victoria hadn't been his first. There were others, their disappearances disguised as accidents or convenient relocations. Their fortunes absorbed into the Pierce empire. Eleanor, ever the strategist, sensed the shifting dynamics. She increased her psychological warfare, but now Charlotte saw through her tactics. Each coincidental run-in with Donald's ex-girlfriends, each subtle reminder of her replaceability, only served to strengthen Charlotte's resolve. The turning point came during the annual Pierce Industries board retreat at the Ritz-Carlton in the Cayman Islands. Charlotte, playing the role of devoted wife, used her access to photograph crucial documents while Donald was in meetings. But she wasn't the only one with an agenda. "I know what you're doing," a voice said behind her as she stood on her suite's balcony. It was James Thompson, the CEO of Thompson Global, their supposed merger partner. "And I want in." Thompson revealed that the merger was a trap. Pierce Industries was planning to asset strip his company, leaving thousands jobless while pocketing billions. He offered to help Charlotte expose the truth, but his help came with conditions that made her question his motives. Meanwhile, Harper's cousin at Kellerman and Ross had assembled a team of lawyers ready to move against Pierce Industries. But as they gathered evidence, Charlotte discovered a painful truth. Harper's family had old ties to the Pierces, and her cousin's firm had helped bury Victoria's case. "I swear I didn't know," Harper pleaded during a tense confrontation at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. "My family kept me in the dark. But Charlotte, you have to believe me. I'm on your side." The web of betrayal and loyalty grew more complex with each passing day. Richard, despite the risks to himself, continued gathering intelligence from his connections in the luxury service industry. But even he had secrets. His apparently humble position as a sommelier masked connections to European banking families with their own grievances against the Pierces. Charlotte found herself at the center of a dangerous game, unsure whom to trust. The evidence she'd gathered painted a picture of corruption spanning decades, forced acquisitions, environmental disasters covered up with bribes, politicians bought and sold like vintage wines. Eleanor, proving more formidable than ever, began making moves of her own. She arranged for Charlotte's former interior design mentor to receive an offer she couldn't refuse, contingent on her publicly discrediting Charlotte's professional reputation. "It's nothing personal, dear," Eleanor said during a private lunch at Le Bernardin. "Just insurance. You understand, don't you? In our world, we must always plan for contingencies." But Charlotte had learned from the best. While Eleanor focused on destroying her past, Charlotte was building her future. She had assembled her own network of influences, disgruntled former employees, overlooked service staff, and even some of New York's old money families who resented the Pierces' new power. The pieces were in place, but the risks were mounting. Donald's cleanup crew had started following Harper, and Richard reported suspicious inquiries about his past. Even Thompson's offer of alliance seemed increasingly like a carefully laid trap. During a record-breaking auction at Christie's, where Donald was bidding millions on a rare Monet, Charlotte received another anonymous message. Victoria left a failsafe, downtown storage unit 2317, code 051219. Hurry. The discovery of Victoria's failsafe would change everything, but it also meant Charlotte had to make an impossible choice. The evidence she needed was within reach, but using it would destroy not just Donald and Eleanor, but dozens of powerful families connected to Pierce Industries. As she stood in their penthouse that night, watching Manhattan's lights glitter like diamonds in the darkness, Charlotte faced her moment of truth. The weight of her diamonds felt like armor now, her designer dress a warrior's uniform. She had learned to play their game, perhaps too well. Tomorrow would bring either her greatest triumph or her final defeat. But as she prepared for bed, maintaining the perfect facade of a devoted wife, Charlotte allowed herself a small, dangerous smile. In teaching her to be the perfect Pierce woman, they had created something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. The next morning's headlines would shake Manhattan's foundations, but the real earthquake was still to come. The game was no longer about escape. It was about justice, revenge, and the price of truth in a world built on beautiful lies. Charlotte's investigation led her deeper into the Pierce family's history of manipulation and control. During a private exhibition at the Guggenheim, she encountered an elderly art curator who had worked with the family for decades. Between discussions of priceless paintings and upcoming auctions, the curator revealed a pattern that sent chills down Charlotte's spine. "Every generation has its Eleanor," the curator whispered, pretending to admire a Kandinsky. "A woman who maintains the family's power through whatever means necessary. Your mother-in-law." She learned from the best. Her own mother-in-law orchestrated similar accidents in the 1980s. The revelation added another layer to Charlotte's understanding. The Pierce dynasty wasn't just about wealth and power. It was about control passed down through generations, each era bringing new methods of maintaining their iron grip on New York's elite society. That evening, during a private concert at Carnegie Hall, Charlotte noticed something unusual. Eleanor's normally impeccable composure slipped when she spotted an unexpected guest, an elegant woman in her 70s who commanded attention despite her minimal jewelry and understated Chanel suit. "Margaret Blackwood," Richard murmured, appearing beside Charlotte with a glass of champagne. The only person who ever successfully challenged the Pierce family and lived to tell about it, though she lost everything in the process. Charlotte managed to arrange a clandestine meeting with Margaret at the Neue Galeries Café. Over Viennese coffee and pastries worth their weight in gold, Margaret shared her story, a tale of resistance, sacrifice, and survival that paralleled Charlotte's own situation with haunting similarity. "They'll try to isolate you completely soon," Margaret warned, her aged hands trembling slightly as she reached for her cup. When Eleanor started losing control of her first daughter-in-law, she arranged for her to be committed to a private psychiatric facility in Switzerland. The poor girl never returned. The weight of these revelations pressed heavily on Charlotte as she attended the opening of a new luxury hotel tower that evening. Donald was there, charming investors with practiced ease while keeping her within arm's reach. His possessive gestures, once masked as affection, now felt like warnings. But Charlotte wasn't without resources of her own. Through careful observation and strategic planning, she had identified potential allies among the hotel staff, people who had witnessed the Pierce family's darker moments and kept their silence out of fear rather than loyalty. The hotel's head of security, a former military intelligence officer named Marcus Kane, proved particularly valuable. He had maintained detailed records of every incident he'd been asked to handle for the Pierce family over the years. "I've got documentation of at least 3 cover-ups," Marcus revealed during a brief conversation in the hotel's security office, including footage from the night Victoria disappeared. "I kept it as insurance, but maybe it's time it served a greater purpose." Charlotte's network of allies continued to grow, but so did the danger. Eleanor's surveillance became more obvious, almost threatening in its visibility. New security personnel appeared in the building, their presence a constant reminder of the family's reach. During a charity gala at the American Museum of Natural History, Charlotte overheard a conversation between Donald and one of his trusted advisors that confirmed her worst fears. They were discussing contingency plans, ways to handle her if she became problematic like Victoria. "The facility in Switzerland is still an option," the advisor suggested, his words nearly lost in the ambient noise of the gala. "Or there's always the sailing accident scenario. It worked before." The conversation sent Charlotte into action. She began making preparations of her own, converting some of her jewelry into untraceable cryptocurrency accounts, establishing connections with journalists known for their integrity, and securing multiple escape routes. Harper, despite the complicated revelation about her family's connections, proved invaluable in this phase. She helped Charlotte set up a secure communication network using burner phones and encrypted messaging apps. More importantly, she introduced Charlotte to a group of domestic violence survivors who had rebuilt their lives after escaping wealthy, powerful abusers. The final piece of Victoria's puzzle waited in that downtown storage unit. When Charlotte finally managed to access it, she found something unexpected, not just evidence of financial crimes, but proof of a systematic conspiracy involving some of New York's most prominent families. Victoria had uncovered a network of shell companies and offshore accounts that went far beyond Pierce Industries. The documents revealed how Manhattan's elite had been protecting each other's secrets for generations, creating an intricate web of mutual blackmail and support. The implications were staggering. Using this information wouldn't just expose Donald and Eleanor, it would shake the foundations of New York society itself. Charlotte realized she held in her hands the power to destroy not just her abusers, but an entire system of privilege and corruption. As she returned to the penthouse that night, Charlotte knew she had crossed a point of no return. The evidence she had gathered was too explosive to be ignored, too comprehensive to be buried. The question was no longer whether to use it, but how to survive its revelation. In the morning, she would wake up next to Donald, kiss him goodbye as he left for the office, and maintain every appearance of the perfect Pierce wife. But beneath that polished exterior, plans were in motion that would change everything. The game had evolved beyond personal survival or revenge. Charlotte now stood at the crossroads of a much larger battle, one that would either reshape Manhattan's power structure or destroy her in the attempt. The stakes had never been higher, and the next move would determine not just her fate, but the future of an entire social order built on gilded lies and beautiful deception. The transformation of Charlotte Pierce began in the private exhibition space of a Chelsea art gallery, where she stood before an abstract painting worth millions, seeing herself reflected in its fractured surfaces. The piece, a recent acquisition by Pierce Industries' corporate collection, depicted a butterfly emerging from a gilded cage, an irony not lost on her as she planned her own emergence. "Your eye for design hasn't diminished," noted Regina Winters, a legendary gallerist who had once championed Charlotte's interior design work, "though I suspect you see things differently now." This chance encounter, carefully orchestrated through Richard's connections, marked the beginning of Charlotte's professional resurrection. Regina, it turned out, had her own scores to settle with the Pierce family, who had systematically undervalued and acquired her artist's works through manipulative practices. "Darling, talent doesn't fade just because they try to bury it," Regina declared over lunch at her private club in Tribeca. "The question is, are you ready to reclaim your voice?" Under the guise of curating Pierce Industries' corporate art collection, Charlotte began rebuilding her professional network. She utilized Eleanor's insistence on maintaining appearances to attend design conferences and art fairs, each event becoming an opportunity to reconnect with old colleagues and establish new alliances. The process required a delicate balance. By day, she maintained her role as the perfect corporate wife, attending board meetings and charity galas at Donald's side. But in carefully stolen moments, she was laying the groundwork for her independence, using the very skills Eleanor had taught her about networking and influence. "You've learned to move differently," Harper observed during one of their supervised lunches at Le Bernardin. Like a chess player who's finally seeing the whole board, Charlotte's transformation extended beyond the professional sphere through a discreet arrangement with Dr. Sarah Chen, a renowned psychiatrist who specialized in treating survivors of high society abuse. She began addressing the psychological trauma of her marriage. Their sessions, disguised as spa appointments at the Mandarin Oriental, helped Charlotte understand the intricate web of manipulation she'd been caught in. Dr. Chen, who had treated other women from New York's elite circles, provided crucial insights into the patterns of control and abuse that characterized families like the Pierces. Your hypervigilance, your ability to read rooms and anticipate threats, these aren't weaknesses, Dr. Chen explained during one session. They're survival skills. Now it's time to turn them into strengths. Charlotte began applying these insights to her daily life. She transformed her forced social appearances into opportunities for gathering intelligence and building alliances. Every charity board she was pressured to join became a potential network of support. Every social obligation a chance to strengthen her position. Richard, moving seamlessly through the world of luxury service, became an invaluable partner in her evolution. His wine expertise provided cover for their meetings, while his connections helped her establish secure channels of communication with other allies. "The best vintages," he reminded her during a wine tasting at the St. Regis, "develop their character under pressure, but timing the harvest is crucial." Through Richard's network, Charlotte met Sophia Anderson, a Swedish tech entrepreneur who had successfully sued her billionaire ex-husband despite his family's powerful connections. Sophia became a mentor, teaching Charlotte how to protect herself digitally and maintain secure communications. "The problem with golden handcuffs," Sophia noted during a secret meeting in her penthouse at 15 Central Park West, "is that everyone sees the gold, but no one notices the handcuffs until it's too late." Under Sophia's guidance, Charlotte began taking coding classes, disguised as social media management workshops, approved by Pierce Industries' PR team. She learned to navigate cryptocurrency markets, creating a financial safety net that even Eleanor's extensive banking connections couldn't trace. Professional opportunities began emerging in unexpected places. A Middle Eastern royal family, impressed by her subtle recommendations during a state dinner, requested her services in redesigning their New York pied-à-terre. Eleanor, seeing an opportunity to strengthen Pierce Industries' international connections, unwittingly gave Charlotte permission to take on the project. The apartment became Charlotte's canvas for rebellion. Every design choice, while appearing to conform to the client's luxurious expectations, contained hidden elements of resistance and empowerment. The project's success led to more commissions, each carefully selected to expand her independent network while maintaining her cover as the dutiful Pierce wife. "You've created something remarkable here," the princess told her during the reveal, understanding more than she let on. "A space that appears to conform while subtly encouraging freedom. Rather like you, I suspect." Donald, focused on the Thompson merger and his own power plays, failed to notice how his wife's carefully curated social schedule was actually building her escape route. Each charity gala she hosted added to her list of allies. Every corporate event strengthened her position in New York's power structure. Even Eleanor's attempts at control began to backfire. Her insistence that Charlotte join the board of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Conservation Committee provided access to art world figures beyond the Pierce family's influence. The mandatory appearances at Fashion Week events connected her with designers and creative directors who recognized her talent and offered quiet support. "You remind me of Coco Chanel," noted a legendary fashion editor during a private showing at Bergdorf Goodman. "Not the sanitized version in history books, but the real woman, the one who understood that style could be armor." Charlotte's inner circle grew carefully. selectively. In addition to Harper and Richard, she found allies in unexpected places. A junior partner at Pierce Industries law firm who had witnessed Victoria's case being buried, a society photographer who had documented years of covered-up incidents, a retired doorman from their building who had maintained detailed records of suspicious activities. Marcus Kane, the hotel security chief, proved particularly valuable in teaching Charlotte counter-surveillance techniques. During apparently casual conversations at corporate events, he showed her how to spot tails, identify listening devices, and maintain operational security. The biggest mistake they make, he told her, while demonstrating how to sweep for bugs in her office, is assuming that wealth equals competence. Their overconfidence creates blind spots. The greatest challenge was maintaining her composure as she uncovered more of the Pierce family's secrets. Each new revelation about Victoria, about Donald's other victims, about Eleanor's systematic destruction of perceived threats, tested her resolve to stick to her carefully crafted plan. During a weekend charity retreat at the Pierce family estate in the Hamptons, Charlotte had a moment of crisis. Walking through the manicured gardens where Victoria had once planted roses, she felt the weight of her predecessor's fate pressing down on her. "You're not alone this time," Harper reminded her during a secure call that evening, "and you're not the same person they tried to break." The support of other survivors proved crucial to Charlotte's resilience. Through carefully arranged meetings at art galleries and charity events, she connected with women who had escaped similar situations in New York's elite circles. Each story of survival strengthened her resolve and refined her strategy. One such survivor, a former socialite who had rebuilt her life after escaping an abusive banking dynasty, taught Charlotte the importance of maintaining multiple identities within her role. "Let them think they've won," she advised during a seemingly casual lunch at Jean-Georges. The perfect wife, the gracious hostess, the philanthropic face of the family, play these roles so well they never suspect you've outgrown them. Charlotte's evolution became a masterclass in strategic patience. She learned to use the Pierce family's own weapons against them: their obsession with appearance, their reliance on social networks, their assumption that wealth could buy silence and compliance. Even her sessions with Dr. Chen evolved, moving beyond therapy to strategy. The doctor, who had helped other women navigate similar escapes from powerful families, provided crucial insights into the psychology of her opponents. "Eleanor's control comes from her own fears," Dr. Chen observed. "Understanding her vulnerabilities is as important as protecting yourself from her attacks." As autumn turned to winter, Charlotte's preparation began showing results. Her independent design work, though carefully masked as extensions of Pierce Industries' influence, was gaining recognition in its own right. Her network of allies had grown into a sophisticated support system, each member carefully vetted and compartmentalized. Most importantly, she had learned to turn her trauma into strength. The hypervigilance that had once been a symptom of abuse became a finely tuned radar for detecting threats and opportunities. Her ability to read rooms and manipulate social situations, honed under Eleanor's cruel tutelage, became tools for building her escape route. During the annual Pierce Industries Winter Gala at the Plaza, Charlotte caught her reflection in a mirror and barely recognized herself. The woman who looked back wasn't just surviving anymore, she was preparing to thrive. Her Dior gown felt less like a costume and more like battle armor, her diamonds no longer chains but weapons in her arsenal. "You've changed," Donald commented that evening, his tone carrying a note of suspicion. "There's something different about you lately." Charlotte gave him the smile she had perfected, empty and bright as the chandeliers above them. "Just growing into my role as a Pierce woman, darling. Isn't that what you and Eleanor always wanted?" But beneath that practiced smile, Charlotte was ready for the next phase of her plan. The evidence was gathered, the allies were in position, and her strength had been tested and proven. The butterfly was ready to break free from its gilded cage, and the shockwaves would reshape Manhattan's social landscape forever. As she moved through the gala, accepting compliments and playing her part to perfection, Charlotte knew that everything was about to change. The skills she had gained, the strength she had found, and the network she had built were about to be tested in ways that would determine not just her future, but the future of everyone caught in the Pierce family's web of influence. The following week brought unexpected opportunities for Charlotte to test her newfound strengths. A crisis at one of Pierce Industries' luxury hotel properties required her to step in and manage a complete redesign of the presidential suite. The project, worth millions, would typically have been outsourced to a prestigious firm, but Charlotte convinced Donald and Eleanor that handling it internally would demonstrate the family's personal commitment to excellence. "Trust me to represent our family's standards," she told Eleanor over tea at the Mark Hotel. "After all, you've taught me everything about maintaining the Pierce image." Eleanor, pleased by what she perceived as Charlotte's submission to her influence, agreed. It was exactly the opening Charlotte needed. The hotel project became a showcase for her strategic thinking. She assembled a team of contractors and artisans who, unknown to the Pierces, had all been victims of the family's business practices in the past. Each one brought not just their skills, but their own motivation for seeing Charlotte succeed in her larger plan. "The marble for the bathroom? We're sourcing it from the Castellano quarry in Italy," she informed Donald during a project review. What she didn't mention was that the Castellano family had once owned 3 luxury hotels in Manhattan before Pierce Industries orchestrated their financial ruin. Through the project, Charlotte also connected with Diane Zhang, a rising star in New York's real estate development scene. Diane, who had survived her own escape from an abusive business partnership, recognized the signs in Charlotte immediately. "The trick isn't just getting out," Diane advised during a private meeting in her office at Hudson Yards. "It's making sure you have somewhere to land. Let's talk about your future in design, your real future, not the one they've planned for you." Together, they began laying the groundwork for Charlotte's independent design firm, disguising their meetings as consultations for the hotel project. Diane introduced Charlotte to key players in the industry who operated outside the Pierce sphere of influence, each connection carefully vetted and secured. The hotel project also allowed Charlotte to demonstrate her business acumen. She brought the redesign in under budget, while exceeding expectations, earning praise from Pierce Industries board members. More importantly, she used the project to establish her own relationships with suppliers, contractors, and industry professionals who would prove vital to her future independence. "You've managed to turn a simple renovation into a masterclass in networking," Harper observed during a site visit. "They think you're building their empire, but you're actually building your escape route." Even Richard found ways to contribute to the project, using his wine expertise to help design a state-of-the-art wine cellar for the hotel's penthouse suite. Their professional interactions provided cover for sharing information and coordinating with their growing network of allies. As the hotel project neared completion, Charlotte faced a crucial test of her new capabilities. During the final week of construction, Eleanor's private investigator discovered one of Charlotte's secure communication channels with Harper. Instead of panicking, Charlotte used the skills she'd learned from Marcus Kane to turn the situation to her advantage. She orchestrated a subtle campaign of misinformation, letting Eleanor's spies discover carefully crafted evidence that led them to believe Harper was working against Charlotte's interests. The deception was so convincing that Eleanor actually warned Charlotte about Harper's betrayal, unwittingly strengthening their cover for continued communication. "Sometimes," Dr. Chen noted during their next session, "the best defense is letting them think they're winning. You've learned to use their own paranoia as a shield." The success of the hotel project marked a turning point in Charlotte's journey. She had proved to herself and her allies that she could operate right under the Pierce family's nose, building power and influence while appearing to submit to their control. More importantly, she had created a blueprint for her eventual emergence from their shadow. As winter settled over Manhattan, Charlotte's transformation was nearly complete. The frightened bride who had stood in the plaza's ballroom just months ago had evolved into a strategist capable of playing the long game. Her network of allies had grown into a sophisticated operation, each member carefully positioned to support her ultimate goal of freedom and justice. During the hotel's grand reopening gala, Charlotte stood beside Donald as he praised her work to New York's elite. She smiled and accepted the compliments with practiced grace, but her mind was already focused on the next phase of her plan. The evidence from Victoria's storage unit, combined with what she'd gathered through her growing network, was almost ready to be deployed. As she raised her champagne glass for a toast, Charlotte caught Eleanor watching her with an unreadable expression. For a moment their eyes met across the crowded room, and Charlotte wondered if her mother-in-law sensed the change in her. But then Donald's hand tightened possessively on her waist, and she remembered that her greatest protection was their certainty that they had broken her spirit. They would learn too late that they had instead forged her into something far more dangerous, a woman who had mastered their own game and was ready to rewrite the rules. The beginning of the end came during the annual Pierce Foundation Winter Ball at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Temple of Dendur glowed with thousands of imported lights, the ancient stone reflecting the diamonds and ambitions of Manhattan's elite. Charlotte stood at Donald's side in a custom Valentino gown, watching Eleanor work the room with practiced precision, knowing that in her Bottega Veneta clutch rested a USB drive that would shatter their carefully constructed world. The evidence from Victoria's storage unit had proved more explosive than anyone anticipated. Not just proof of financial fraud and covered-up crimes, but a detailed documentation of the Pierce family's systematic destruction of anyone who threatened their empire. Victoria, it seemed, had been more thorough than her killers realized. "Everything is in position," Richard murmured as he poured a rare vintage of Chateau Lafite Rothschild. "Sophia's team has confirmed the digital deadman switch is active. If anything happens to you, everything goes public automatically." Charlotte maintained her perfect smile as she surveyed the room. The guest list read like a who's who of American power: Supreme Court justices, Wall Street titans, media moguls, and old money families whose fortunes were intricately tied to Pierce Industries' secrets. Many of them would be collateral damage in what was about to unfold. The first move came from an unexpected direction. James Thompson, their supposed merger partner, approached Donald with news that made him visibly pale. The Thompson merger, cornerstone of Pierce Industries' latest expansion, was suddenly in jeopardy. "There seems to be some irregularity in the accounts," Thompson announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "My board is quite concerned about certain offshore transactions." Donald's grip on his whiskey glass tightened. "This isn't the place for business discussions, James." But Thompson, it turned out, had his own agenda. "Actually, Donald, I think this is exactly the place, especially given what the SEC will be announcing tomorrow morning." Eleanor materialized at Donald's side, her Chanel smile brittle. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in private." As they moved toward the temple's inner chamber, Charlotte caught Harper's eye across the room. Her friend was positioned near the museum's main security office, where Marcus Kane had arranged for certain surveillance footage to be conveniently archived. The confrontation that followed would be remembered in Manhattan's social circles for years to come. Thompson, it emerged, had been working with federal investigators for months. The Thompson merger wasn't just failing, it was a sophisticated sting operation. "Did you really think I wouldn't investigate after what happened to my sister?" Thompson's voice carried through the ancient stone chamber. "Victoria was my twin, Donald. Did you think I wouldn't seek justice?" The revelation hit the room like a thunderbolt. Charlotte watched the color drain from Eleanor's face as she realized the depth of their miscalculation. Victoria's brother had spent years working his way into position, gaining the Pierce family's trust, all while building a case against them. But Thompson's revenge was just the beginning. As security personnel with federal badges began appearing at the party's exits, Charlotte implemented the next phase of her plan. "I believe these belong in the public record," she announced, connecting her phone to the ball's audio-visual system. The temple's walls came alive with projected documents, offshore account statements, surveillance photos, confidential reports detailing decades of Pierce family crimes. Donald moved toward her with dangerous intent, but Richard and Marcus Kane stepped forward, their positions carefully planned for this moment. "Don't," Richard warned, his sommelier's charm replaced by cold determination. "The days of silencing people are over." Eleanor, ever the strategist, attempted to take control. "Charlotte, darling, clearly you're unwell. We can discuss this privately. Find you the help you need, like the help you found for Victoria in Switzerland." Charlotte's voice carried through the stunned crowd. "Or perhaps like the sailing accident you arranged when she refused to cooperate." The evidence continued to stream across the temple's walls. Photos of Victoria's last days, security footage from the Cayman Islands showing Donald's involvement, documentation of Eleanor's elaborate cover-up operation. But the true masterstroke came from an unexpected ally. Diane Zhang stepped forward, her tablet displaying live feeds from similar scenes playing out across Manhattan. Pierce Industries' satellite offices were being raided, their secret server facilities secured, their private banking partners surrounded by federal agents. "Did you really think Charlotte was working alone?" Diane asked, her voice carrying notes of satisfaction. "We're all Victoria's legacy. Everyone you've tried to destroy over the years working together waiting for this moment. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Board members began receiving frantic calls from their lawyers. Social media exploded with leaked documents and accusations. The carefully constructed facade of Pierce family respectability crumbled in real time. Donald's reaction was predictably violent. He lunged for Charlotte, but years of hypervigilance had prepared her for this moment. She sidestepped his attack, letting him crash into a display case of priceless Egyptian artifacts. The shattering glass became a perfect metaphor for the destruction of his world. "Security cameras caught that, Donald," Charlotte informed him calmly, "just like they caught what happened at our wedding. No more covering up your violence." Eleanor's composed mask finally cracked. "Are you ungrateful little—" she began, but Charlotte cut her off. "Ungrateful? For teaching me how to navigate high society, for showing me how to manipulate people and maintain appearances." Charlotte's laugh was cold and clear. "You taught me too well, Eleanor. Every lesson about power and control, every tutorial in destroying people's lives, I learned it all perfectly." The arrival of federal agents transformed the charity ball into a crime scene. As handcuffs replaced diamond bracelets and Miranda rights were read to Manhattan's elite, Charlotte felt a strange sense of unreality. The carefully orchestrated plan had succeeded beyond their expectations, yet the human cost was staggering. Families who had reigned over New York society for generations were watching their empires crumble. Children were seeing their parents led away in handcuffs. Fortunes built on decades of corruption and cruelty were evaporating in real time. "You've destroyed everything," Donald snarled as agents led him toward the exit. "Our family, our legacy, our entire world." "No, Donald," Charlotte corrected him. "You destroyed it yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." But the night's revelations weren't over. As federal agents combed through Eleanor's phone, they discovered something that shocked even Charlotte. Eleanor had been planning to sacrifice Donald to save the family empire, arranging for him to take the fall for their crimes, while she maintained control through a network of proxy boards and shell companies. "My own son was becoming a liability," Eleanor explained with chilling calm as agents secured her Cartier bracelets with handcuffs. "Sentiment is a luxury we can't afford in our position." The betrayal seemed to break something in Donald. He began shouting accusations, revealing family secrets that even Charlotte's investigation hadn't uncovered. The depth of the Pierce family's corruption shocked even the hardened federal agents. Throughout the chaos, Charlotte maintained her composure, the perfect poise Eleanor had demanded now serving as armor. She watched as the Pierce empire crumbled, each revelation adding to the destruction of the family that had tried to own her. Harper appeared at her side, squeezing her hand in silent support. "Victoria would be proud," she whispered. But the night's most surprising twist came from an unexpected source. As Eleanor was being led away, she locked eyes with Charlotte one final time. "You think you've won?" she asked, her voice carrying that familiar note of superiority. "You think exposing our crimes will bring justice? Look around, dear. Look at all these powerful people being arrested. Their children, their families, their employees, thousands of lives ruined. Was your revenge worth destroying so many innocent people?" The question hit Charlotte harder than any of Donald's physical abuse. She looked around the Temple of Dender, at the shell-shocked faces of people whose worlds had just imploded. Children of privilege suddenly facing uncertain futures, employees wondering if they'd have jobs tomorrow, charities dependent on Pierce family donations now at risk. "That's the price of justice," Richard said quietly, appearing beside her. "The truth hurts more people than the lies sometimes." As dawn broke over Manhattan, the full scope of the night's events began to emerge. Pierce Industries' stock was in freefall, trading halted on exchanges worldwide. The Thompson merger was revealed as a complex federal operation involving multiple agencies. Dozens of arrests were being made across the city as evidence of widespread corruption came to light. Charlotte stood on the steps of the Met, watching the sunrise paint the city gold. The weight of Victoria's files in her clutch had been replaced by something heavier, the responsibility of what came next. "Was Eleanor right?" she asked Harper, as they watched another wave of federal agents enter the museum. "Did we cause more harm than good?" "You gave people the truth," Harper answered. "What they do with it is their choice." The media was already gathering, hungry for details of the scandal that would dominate headlines for months to come. Charlotte knew her role wasn't finished. There would be trials, testimonies, and the complex task of trying to ensure that innocent people caught in the blast radius found some way to rebuild. As she prepared to face the press, Charlotte felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. The Pierce family's reign of terror was over, but the cost of victory was higher than she'd imagined. The innocent children of guilty parents, the employees who'd known nothing of the corruption, the charities and institutions that would suffer from the fallout, all of them were part of the price of justice. "Ms. Morrison," reporters called out as she descended the museum steps. "Did you plan this from the beginning? Was your marriage to Donald Pierce part of a longer operation?" Charlotte paused, looking back at the Temple of Dender, where her perfect world had shattered. In its place was something harder, colder, but ultimately more real. "No," she answered finally. "I planned to be the perfect Pierce wife. Instead, I became something they never expected. Someone who refused to be broken." As dawn broke over a changed Manhattan, Charlotte realized that the true test of her strength was just beginning. The easy part was exposing the truth. The harder part would be living with its consequences. The morning brought a new wave of revelations. As federal agents combed through Pierce Industries' headquarters in the gleaming tower on Park Avenue, they discovered a hidden vault in Eleanor's private office. Inside were decades of blackmail material, evidence of crimes and indiscretions that had kept New York's elite under the Pierce family's control for generations. "The scope of this is unprecedented," remarked the lead federal prosecutor during an emergency meeting in a secured suite at the Four Seasons. "We're looking at potentially hundreds of indictments involving some of the most powerful people in the country." Charlotte sat in the meeting, still wearing her Valentino gown from the night before, as the full impact of their actions became clear. The evidence she'd helped uncover didn't just implicate the Pierce family. It revealed a vast network of corruption that touched every level of society. The Brazilian mining operation wasn't just about profit, an FBI analyst explained, displaying documents on a secure screen. It was a sophisticated money laundering operation involving multiple Fortune 500 companies. The environmental disaster there was deliberately orchestrated to cover up the financial trails. The human cost of the Pierce family's crimes became increasingly apparent as more details emerged. The accidents that had befallen their opponents weren't limited to Victoria. There were others, whistleblowers, journalists, even family members who had threatened to expose the truth. Each story added another layer of horror to the family's legacy. Richard, who had remained by Charlotte's side throughout the morning, received urgent news from his European contacts. "The Swiss banking authorities have frozen the emergency accounts," he reported. "Eleanor's contingency plans are falling apart. The entire network of shell companies is collapsing." But it was the personal stories that hit Charlotte the hardest. As news of the arrest spread, people began coming forward with their own experiences of Pierce family corruption. Former employees who had been silenced, small business owners who had been ruined, families who had lost everything to the family's machinations. During a brief break in the proceedings, Charlotte found herself in the hotel's powder room, facing her reflection in the gilt-edged mirror. The woman who looked back at her was both familiar and strange, still wearing the trappings of Pierce family privilege, but now standing on the other side of their power. "You did what was necessary," Harper said, joining her in the bathroom. "But that doesn't make it any easier to bear." The day brought a parade of lawyers, federal agents, and journalists, each wanting Charlotte's perspective on different aspects of the scandal. She maintained her composure, drawing on years of Eleanor's training in handling the press, but now using those skills to ensure the truth was heard. One particularly poignant moment came when Margaret Blackwood, the woman who had previously stood up to the Pierce family, arrived at the Four Seasons. Despite her age, she carried herself with dignity as she shared her own story of surviving the family's attempts to destroy her. "They take everything from you," Margaret observed, her aged hands clasping Charlotte's. "But they can't take who you really are, not unless you let them." By evening, the full scale of the Pierce Empire's collapse was becoming clear. The stock market had suffered its worst day since the financial crisis, with multiple companies implicated in the family's schemes facing possible bankruptcy. The ripple effects were spreading through the global financial system. Donald, in federal custody, had begun turning on his own family in an attempt to save himself. His revelations about Eleanor's long-term plans shocked even those who thought they knew the family's capacity for betrayal. "She was going to have me committed," he raged during his initial interrogation. Her own son. She had the papers drawn up months ago. Charlotte wasn't the target, I was. Eleanor, meanwhile, maintained her regal bearing, even in detention. When presented with the evidence against her, she merely smiled and requested her lawyer from Wachtell Lipton. Her final words to Charlotte, delivered through her attorney, were both a threat and a prophecy. "You'll understand someday, dear. Power isn't about right or wrong. It's about who survives, and survival always has a price." As night fell over Manhattan again, Charlotte stood at the window of her suite at the Four Seasons, watching lights flicker in the towers that had once symbolized the Pierce family's power. The city felt different now, as if awakening from a collective spell. Richard joined her at the window, his customary wine knowledge now revealed as just one facet of a much deeper character. "The French have a term," he said, "l'heure bleue, the blue hour. It's that moment between day and night when everything changes. That's what this is for New York." The next few days would bring more revelations, more arrests, more unraveling of the complex web of corruption that had sustained Manhattan's elite. But for now, in this moment of transition, Charlotte allowed herself to feel the full weight of what they had accomplished. "Tomorrow will be harder," Harper said, joining them at the window, "when the adrenaline wears off and the real work begins." Charlotte nodded, understanding that exposing the truth was only the first step. The harder task would be helping to build something better from the ruins of the system they had destroyed. As midnight approached, Charlotte received one final piece of news. Victoria's brother, James Thompson, had secured control of Pierce Industries' board. His first act would be to establish a fund for the victims of the family's crimes, with Charlotte named as one of the trustees. "It's not just about justice anymore," he told her over a secure line. "It's about healing, about making sure this never happens again." Charlotte looked out at the city she had helped to change, understanding that her journey was far from over. The fall of the Pierce family was just the beginning. The real challenge would be facing the consequences of truth in a world built on beautiful lies. "We'll need to be stronger than they ever were," she said softly, watching the city lights flicker like stars. "Not to maintain power, but to make sure it never corrupts like this again." The night stretched before her, full of possibilities and challenges she had yet to face. But for the first time since she'd walked down the aisle at the plaza, Charlotte felt truly free. The price of that freedom had been high, higher than she'd ever imagined. But as she stood between her most trusted allies, watching Manhattan's landscape change in real time, she knew it had been worth every cost. 3 months after the fall of Pierce Industries, Manhattan's social landscape had transformed beyond recognition. The grand ballrooms that had once hosted the family's triumphant galas now echoed with whispered conversations about plea deals and asset forfeitures. The winter season, usually a whirlwind of charity events and society weddings, had given way to a parade of legal proceedings and congressional hearings. Charlotte observed these changes from an unexpected vantage point. The penthouse office of the newly established Pierce Victims Compensation Fund, housed in the very tower that had once been the epicenter of the family's power. The $95 million apartment that had been her gilded cage was now being converted into a resource center for survivors of domestic abuse among the upper classes. "The irony isn't lost on me," she remarked to Harper during a late-night strategy session. "Using their own weapons to undo their damage." The fund's work had revealed layers of corruption and abuse that even Charlotte hadn't anticipated. Each day brought new revelations as victims stepped forward, their stories painting a picture of systematic exploitation that spanned generations. The Pierce family's influence had reached into every corner of society, from the highest boardrooms to the most modest service positions. Donald's trial had become a media sensation, his public breakdown revealing secrets that shocked even those who thought they knew the family's depths. He had turned completely against Eleanor, his testimony exposing decades of manipulation and abuse within the Pierce dynasty itself. "She made me what I am," he had declared during a particularly dramatic court session. Every act of cruelty, every accident, every destroyed life, it was all part of her grand design. Even Victoria's death was orchestrated to test my loyalty. Eleanor, for her part, maintained her regal bearing even as her empire crumbled. From her detention at a luxury facility in upstate New York, she continued to manipulate and scheme. Her network of influence, though diminished, proved surprisingly resilient. "Never underestimate a wounded snake," Richard warned during a private dinner at his newly opened wine bar in Brooklyn. "Eleanor still has supporters in places we haven't discovered." His warning proved prophetic. As Charlotte worked to rebuild what the Pierce family had destroyed, she encountered resistance from unexpected quarters. Board members who had seemed supportive suddenly became obstruction. Donations were mysteriously delayed. Critical documents vanished from secure servers. Eleanor's contingency plans had contingency plans, explained Marcus Kane, who now headed security for the fund. We're still finding hidden accounts and buried evidence months later. The most surprising developments came from James Thompson, Victoria's brother, whose own motivations proved more complex than anyone had suspected. During a private meeting in his office at Thompson Global, he revealed information that changed everything. Victoria wasn't just gathering evidence against the Pierces, he explained, displaying a series of encrypted files on his secure terminal. She was mapping an entire network of families like them, dynasties built on exploitation and abuse. The Pierces were just one head of the Hydra. This revelation forced Charlotte to reevaluate everything they had accomplished. The Pierce family's fall had created a power vacuum, and other corrupt dynasties were already moving to fill it. The very systems they had exposed were trying to rebuild themselves in new forms. Meeting in the old Pierce Industries boardroom feels like tempting fate, Harper observed during an emergency session with their core team. The room's floor-to-ceiling windows still offered the same commanding view of Manhattan, but now the perspective felt different. Less about power, more about responsibility. Charlotte had assembled a unique coalition to address these new challenges. Diane Zhang's technological expertise combined with Sophia Anderson's financial acumen created a formidable investigative force. Margaret Blackwood's historical knowledge of old money families proved invaluable in understanding the deeper patterns of corruption. But it was Dr. Sarah Chen who identified the most critical challenge they faced. "We're not just fighting against corruption," she explained during a strategy session. "We're fighting against a mindset that's been cultivated for generations, the belief that power justifies everything." The truth of her words became apparent as they delved deeper into Victoria's research. The evidence pointed to a complex web of relationships between wealthy families, each protecting the other's secrets while maintaining a facade of respectability. The Pierces had been powerful, but they were part of a larger ecosystem of exploitation. "It's like a Russian doll of corruption," Richard noted, his wine expertise now supplemented by deep knowledge of how luxury industries facilitated these networks. Each layer we peel back reveals another, more intricate system of control. Charlotte's personal transformation continued through these challenges. The skills Eleanor had taught her, the ability to navigate social hierarchies, to read people's motivations, to maintain composure under pressure, became tools for dismantling the very systems that had created them. A decisive moment came during the fund's first major public initiative. Charlotte had organized a symposium at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, bringing together survivors, advocates, and reformed members of privileged families. The event was designed to expose the patterns of abuse while offering paths to accountability and healing. Eleanor, even from detention, attempted to sabotage the event. Her remaining allies in the media began a whisper campaign, suggesting that Charlotte was using the fund for personal revenge. Anonymous sources questioned her motivations, her stability, her right to challenge established social structures. The night before the symposium, Charlotte received a package at her new apartment in Tribeca. Inside was a single black rose and a note in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. "Every revolution eventually becomes what it sought to destroy. You'll understand soon enough." But Charlotte had learned to turn threats into opportunities. At the symposium, she opened her speech by displaying Eleanor's note on the giant screens flanking the Temple of Dender. "This is how they maintain control," she declared to the packed audience. "Through fear, through subtle threats, through the constant reminder that power corrupts. But we're choosing a different path. We're choosing to use our privilege and position to create change, not perpetuate abuse." The symposium became a turning point. More victims came forward, more whistleblowers emerged from other wealthy families, more evidence surfaced of systematic corruption. The movement Charlotte had started was growing beyond her control, becoming something larger and more powerful than she had imagined. But with this success came new dangers. Other families implicated in Victoria's research began taking action to protect themselves. Attempts were made to hack the fund's servers. Charlotte's security team intercepted several serious threats. The price of challenging entrenched power became increasingly clear. "They're afraid," Harper observed during a late-night security briefing. Not just of exposure, but of the example we're setting. We're proving that their power isn't absolute. The final twist in the story came from an unexpected source. Among Eleanor's seized papers, they discovered evidence that Charlotte's own family had once been part of the network she was fighting against. Generations ago, the Morrisons had chosen to step away from the corrupt alliances, accepting a loss of power and influence in exchange for their integrity. Your grandmother didn't just retire to Connecticut, James Thompson revealed, sharing documents from Victoria's files. She walked away from everything to protect your father from becoming what Donald became. She chose freedom over power. This revelation hit Charlotte hard. Her entire journey, from naive bride to survivor to revolutionary, had been shaped by choices made long before she was born. The strength she had discovered in herself was part of a legacy she hadn't known she carried. As the first year after the Pierce family's fall drew to a close, Charlotte found herself back at the Plaza Hotel. The grand ballroom where her wedding had descended into violence was now hosting a fundraiser for domestic violence survivors from privileged backgrounds. The same crystal chandeliers that had witnessed her humiliation now illuminated stories of survival and transformation. "We've come full circle," Richard said, serving a carefully chosen vintage to mark the occasion. "But this time, we're writing a different ending." The fund's work had expanded beyond just compensating the Pierce family's victims. It had become a movement for transparency and accountability among the wealthy elite. Other families, seeing the changes in society, began voluntarily addressing their own histories of abuse and corruption. Charlotte's network had evolved as well. Harper had established a legal advocacy group specifically focused on helping wealthy abuse survivors navigate their unique challenges. Richard's wine bar had become a safe space for people to share their stories away from the public eye. Diane Zhang was developing technology to protect whistleblowers within privileged families. But Eleanor's warning about revolution continued to haunt Charlotte. Each success brought new challenges, each victory revealed more battles to be fought. The systems of power they were challenging had deep roots and long memories. "The real test isn't winning," Dr. Chen reminded her during their final therapy session. "It's maintaining your humanity while fighting inhumane systems. It's remembering why you started this journey." As Charlotte stood at the plaza's ballroom window, watching snow fall on Fifth Avenue, she reflected on everything that had changed. The naive bride who had once stood in this room, accepting abuse in exchange for privilege, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood that true power came from breaking cycles of abuse, not perpetuating them. The Pierce family's fall had been just the beginning. The real work, the hard, complex work of creating lasting change, was still ongoing. But as Charlotte watched the next generation of survivors share their stories in the ballroom that had once symbolized her captivity, she knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. The price of freedom, she had learned, wasn't just about escaping one's own golden cage. It was about ensuring that such cages could never be built again. 5 years after the fall of Pierce Industries, Charlotte stood in her office at the Morrison Foundation for Social Justice, watching the sunset paint Manhattan's skyline in shades of gold. The view from the former Pierce Industries tower still commanded attention, but now it served a different purpose, a beacon of hope rather than a symbol of power. The changes in the city's social landscape had been profound. Donald was serving a 20-year sentence, his testimony against other corrupt families continuing to send shockwaves through high society. Eleanor, despite her best efforts, had failed to maintain her influence from prison. Her recent appeal had been denied, ensuring she would spend the rest of her life in federal custody. "The latest numbers are in," Harper announced, entering the office with a tablet displaying their quarterly report. Her legal advocacy group now occupied an entire floor of the building, providing support to survivors from wealthy families across the globe. "We've helped over 3,000 people break free from abusive situations in privileged households." Richard's wine bar in Brooklyn had evolved into a network of safe houses disguised as luxury establishments, providing refuge for those escaping situations similar to Charlotte's. His expertise in luxury services had proven invaluable in creating spaces where wealthy abuse survivors could feel comfortable while rebuilding their lives. "Victoria would be proud," James Thompson remarked during their monthly board meeting. His sister's legacy had grown far beyond exposing one family's crimes. The evidence she gathered had sparked a global movement examining abuse and corruption among the world's elite. The Morrison Foundation had become a model for transforming corrupt family enterprises into forces for positive change. Other wealthy families, seeing the shifting social tide, had begun voluntarily addressing their histories of abuse and exploitation. The culture of silence that had protected abusers in high society was slowly crumbling. But perhaps the most significant change was in Charlotte herself. The skills Eleanor had taught her about wielding power and influence now served a greater purpose. She had learned to maintain her humanity while fighting inhumane systems, to use privilege as a tool for change rather than control. During a rare quiet moment, Charlotte visited the converted penthouse that had once been her prison. The space now housed a healing center for trauma survivors, its luxurious appointments repurposed to provide comfort rather than intimidation. In the former master bedroom where she had spent so many fearful nights, a group therapy session was in progress. "Sometimes I look at old photos," she confided to Harper later that evening, as they shared a bottle of wine Richard had specially selected for the Foundation's anniversary. The woman in those society pages, wearing designer dresses and perfect smiles, she feels like a stranger now. The final twist in Charlotte's story had come unexpectedly. Her grandmother, the one who had chosen to step away from corrupt alliances generations ago, had left a sealed letter to be opened 5 years after the Pierce family's fall. Its contents revealed a network of other families who had made similar choices, choosing integrity over power. This shadow network, as they called themselves, had been quietly working for generations to protect others from the fate Charlotte had narrowly escaped. With the Morrison Foundation's success, they had finally felt safe enough to come forward, adding their resources and influence to the cause. "Your grandmother wrote that true power isn't in what you can take from others," Charlotte read from the letter, her voice thick with emotion, "but in what you can help them reclaim for themselves." As Charlotte prepared for another evening event at the plaza, this time a celebration of survivors who had rebuilt their lives, she caught her reflection in the office window. The woman who looked back at her wasn't wearing any of the diamonds that had once marked her as Pierce property. Instead, she wore a simple pendant that had belonged to Victoria, found among the evidence in that downtown storage unit. The city stretched out below her, its lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Somewhere in those streets, other stories like hers were playing out, other people gathering the courage to break free, to speak truth to power, to transform pain into purpose. "Ready?" Harper asked, appearing at her office door. Charlotte smiled, gathering her things. The work wasn't finished, might never be finished, but they had created something Eleanor had never imagined possible, a way to use privilege and power to dismantle the very systems that abused them. "You know what Eleanor told me during her last appeal?" Charlotte said as they rode the elevator down. "She said I had become exactly what she trained me to be, someone who knew how to wield power. She thought it was an insult, but she was right. I just chose to wield it differently." As they stepped out into the Manhattan evening, Charlotte felt the weight of all that had changed, and all that remained to be done. The price of freedom had been high, but its rewards were beyond measure. In breaking free from her golden cage, she had helped others find their wings. The night air carried the promise of spring, of renewal, of continued transformation. Charlotte Morrison, no longer a Pierce but now something far more powerful, walked into that promise with her head held high, knowing that every step forward helped light the way for others to follow. If this story touched your heart and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now, and we'll see you there.